for one of those days, Jennifer.
I'm gonna tell her she also left into.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's.
So, the conversation we had earlier.
Just enough in my pocket for me. I got one more.
So it's like, but I'll be really honest with you, I didn't get. We'll need some clarification.
Are we live? We're live. All right, just folks, council, we're live on stream on
Oh, yeah,
Facebook right now. Okay, just a heads up.
that's okay.
We're
We're having an appropriate conversation.
Folks, we're gonna just give a couple minutes here. Counselor Moore is expected to be here. I have not heard otherwise, and as you, if you all look around, this is probably the most well-attended finance committee meeting we've had in a month, some months. So the agenda is pretty lengthy, so I do want to give some time for Counselor Moore to join. Counselor Bob is going to be joining us on Zoom. If that hopefully works out.
I don't have any printed supporting documents.
Oh,
So much,
do you
there was
need-
so much for us to digest with
What-
this agenda.
there is.
Yeah.
What do you need?
I mean, there's nothing imminent, but,
I mean, a lot of this stuff is discussion. If I could share what I have, Elizabeth.
I didn't get the memo.
What memo?
oh, the booklet?
No, they're matching.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's coral. And your umbrella. Matching. Yeah.
Can you message Jeff?
Yeah.
Please.
Normally I would get messaged by that.
Sorry.
Well, I went through,
There
I
is.
haven't, I'll be
There
really
is.
honest with you, I have never read one of these things. I don't read them. This time I decided to read through it and I need notes about things that I questions about. I didn't get through all of it anyway, and a lot of it will understand. But,
Folks, we're gonna call the finance committee meeting to order. Let it be known that all committee members are in attendance. Is Caitlin online? No. Except for Caitlin, she, technical difficulties, she was excused. She tried to join online, can make it. And so we're gonna proceed without Counselor Bob. No big deal. She jumps on, we'll accommodate from there. First order of business is the approval of the July 8th, 2021 Finance Committee, Finance and Community Development Committee.
Motion.
Motion by Counselor Canales, second by Counselor Kelly. Any changes, alterations, or deletions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 2.1 discussion, July month-end report and cash balances. Everybody has received all the documentation per this committee via email. If you have any questions about that report, we can field those questions now.
So like I said, on the supporting documents in front of me, there was a lot to digest with this, so I'm going off memory.
The
Yeah.
July month-end.
Yeah.
Okay.
So excuse me. It would seem that our revenue is above our expenditures. Would that be correct?
Yep,
And
that's a good thing.
of course,
Good thing.
and it looks like well, you've got this as item 2.5. I guess I could wait to there, but it looks like our sales tax is coming ahead by a
Yeah,
significant amount. Would that be appropriate?
projected wise.
Richard's lost in the audience.
That's fine. Counselor Gibbs, projected wise, last sales tax report, we were at 66% of what was expected for budget. Projecting that out to the end of the year, we should look anywhere, conservative wise, we should look anywhere to exceed our budgeted sales tax by about $500,000. If we retain this trajectory.
Okay.
And that would be I know we are jumping ahead, but that would be pre 2019 levels of sales tax revenues.
Okay.
Okay. We are about 60% through the year at this point. And considering where we're at in our expenditures, you know, in sharing these documents with folks, the thing that I typically look at are the last pages of payroll to see where we're at in the annualized spending versus budget. For example, for employee benefits, we're about 84%. If we continue on our current spending in employee benefits, we will have spent 84% of what was budgeted. So we will have retained 16% of that. We certainly don't foresee increasing payroll much. Contracted services on this spending, we would spend about 67% of what we budgeted. As most of us know, overtime is the primary concern that a lot of us have with a lot of the overtime expenditures. We are at 115% if we continue to spend at this level. We're 115% of spent overtime. So we are over spending on overtime, which I think we're all kind of cognizant of and concerned for. I wanted to highlight some of the other bits. And in terms of total payroll spending at this level, we'll have spent 93% of the budget.
At this point, we've spent 93.
No. If we continue to spend at the same
okay.
level at the end of the year, we'll essentially have saved, well, we wouldn't have spent 7% of
Okay.
the total budget for what we've already budgeted. Not the most exciting parts, but this is all right. Any further questions or discussion on the July month end report or the cash balances? Okay, moving on to the 2020 year end report. This is the financial report provided by our independent auditor. This is provided every year as part of the process for closing our books at the end of the year. And this is a fairly comprehensive report on all of our accounts, rationalizing anything that we have missed, we may have missed in the year. Pretty dense. I mean, you could spend 8 months looking through this, which I have.
So before I ask questions about
Yes.
some of the substance in here, I just had a few questions, but there, I can't put my finger on it at this exact moment. Maybe Dean would know. There is language in here, and I did bring this up last year about the council having, oh, here we go. It's on subsection C611, independent audit. Common Council shall provide for an independent annual audit of all city accounts and may provide for more frequent audits as it deems necessary. An independent certified public accountant firm, and again, it goes on. So I'm assuming that's what this does. But it also references the council shall designate no fewer than 3 of its members to serve as an audit committee. And this committee shall lead the process of selecting an independent auditor, direct the work of the independent auditor as to the scope of the annual audit and any matters of concern with respect to internal controls, and receive the report of the independent auditor and present that report to the council with any recommendations from the committee. So here it, I mean, it invokes us as counselors. The council shall designate no fewer than 3 of its members to serve as an audit committee. Can you advise on that, Dean? Above and beyond what this is, which seems to me satisfies subsection 611A, the council shall designate no fewer than 3 of its members to serve as an audit committee. Can you clarify or expand on that? Because I know we did talk about this last year.
Yeah, offhand, no, I don't have the charter in front of me. I don't know if we're also reviewing the payroll audit process. There's some language in there about just the normal audit function of the council in general, but I want to talk to Council Chamberlain Marks and expand on that.
Now, counselors who've been here longer than I have, which is you, Councilor Kelly, has this ever been done before? Well, then, 3 members of the council
Well,
as an audit committee?
what has been done in previous administrations is 3 members of the council each week review bills and sign off. on
Oh, is that what that means?
That's what that has meant in the past. I mean, it's open enough to interpretation where it could mean just about anything. I mean, it could be set up anyway. This committee here could be considered the audit committee for that matter. But
When we, and my understanding is that when we get those audit, when we do the audit every week of the payroll and expenses, that's something that we all sign off on. And then during the regular meeting of the common council, we approve the audited
Okay.
city finance.
The claims. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because I know I had brought that up before.
Thank you, because I didn't see that myself, so appreciate it.
So, had some questions, and I'm sure Richard can answer these because it's information from your office. So on page 45 of this report, there are, it says note number 2, cash and investments, and it's just some questions I have in regards to the terminology or what these things are that I don't understand. There is under note 2, petty cash funds, non-interest bearing accounts and interest bearing accounts. And then there's a distinction between non-restricted cash and restricted cash. What is that? What is that? Could you come to the microphone, Richard? Thank you. Because otherwise no one at home.
Restricted cash would be your asset seizure reserve, so to speak. Okay, instead of just general operating cash.
Asset seizure reserve?
So you can only spend it on a particular set of things. It's not like we can just take free cash and spend it on something. It's free cash, but it's very limited as to what we can then turn around and expend it on.
That's an example. There's a lot of restricted cash. The asset seizure reserve is the one, the police department.
Mhm.
And, you might go by forfeiture cash proceeds or whatever. But in the cash report each week now, you're seeing that there's restricted cash in the general fund.
Mhm.
Hometown Heroes, bid bond guarantees, asset seizure, Clyde Lewis Airplane Fund. Those are all restricted, specific use for spending.
Okay.
And non-interest bearing just means it's in an account that doesn't require interest to be earned. Some of them aren't allowed to earn interest, especially with community development funds. And then petty cash is just petty cash funds. Somebody has an office like Sylvia, she's got a couple $100 for making change.
Okay.
There's about 6,600 across the city in petty cash.
On page 49 of the document, there are discussions of the bonds. It says note number 8, bonds. And there are breakdowns of governmental activities and business type activities. And then we've got net OPEB liabilities under each category. What does that mean?
The governmental.
I know what OPEB is. That's not what I'm asking.
Governmental obligations are the city funds that are considered government funds. And municipal lighting department is an enterprise fund, so it's a business related fund.
Oh,
Just 2 sections of them.
right. I didn't know what those meant. So then the OPEB liabilities, how is that, what does that cover under each then? So for example, it says net OPEB liabilities, the balance for December 31st, 2019 was, it's like 135 million. And at the end of 2020, it looks like 100, I'm estimating 50 million. So like, what's the difference? Is it the people who are in these are getting paid from these funds, or how does?
The other post-employment benefits number is a projection for healthcare costs 85 or so years into the future. After the first 10 years, most actuaries can't even, venture a guess as to what the costs are going to be in the future. So they come up with a number, say 280 million. Then they discount that to the present value. That's the number you're looking at. And they're saying that's your future costs
Page 49.
for all of your post-employment benefits throughout the life of everybody that's involved in those healthcare funds right now.
Okay.
Now, we pay for healthcare each year as we go. $7 million a year, let's call it. So we're already funding that year by year by year, each year. And it's already part of the tax rates, it's already part of the utility rates. So that funding is already accomplished. That is just a disclosure for footnote purposes to say, here's a future liability.
Okay.
Who knows what it's going to be 85 years from now?
On page 50, where it continues on, the annual debt service requirements relating to bonds are as follows. Can you speak to the numbers here where it looks like, well, there's 3 different columns and I think they're the same. One is governmental activities, business type, and the total interest. But on the top of the page, there isn't a title to the column. So can you break some of this down a little? Like, I don't know what I'm,
I'd have to look at the page to tell you what you're looking at.
Want me
But
to show
once again,
let me show it to you. Or?
it's governmental, it's the government funds. Business activity is the MLD fund. That's the separation between the bond obligations or any of the activities being reported.
So in
I have a
total,
question related to that before you move on, if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
Since we're on that subject, on that page 50, for the year 2021, it says the annual debt service requirements relating to bonds are as follows. And the number for 2021 is $2,435,131. If we are attempting to figure out our annual expenses, say for the general fund, does that figure get added into the general fund
Yes,
as
it does.
expense?
It's $1.6 million this year for just the general fund.
$1 million. So of that 2.4 million, $1.6 million
is general
is
fund
general.
in 2021.
Is there any place in the budget where you can see that?
Yeah. It's
Where,
in the
where
report.
do you,
In
I
the
look at the
reports.
budget all the time and I can't really, I have a tough time figuring out what our total expenses are each year.
Do you look at the monthly financial report?
In this example that I'm talking about, I'm looking at the annual budget that was passed in January of this year.
Do you look at the monthly financial report?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do.
Do you have that with you?
I have it right in front of me here.
Okay. So if you look at the Munis report, it starts for the general fund. It's the 3rd page in. And go to page 2. You should see transfer to debt service. And actually, we have $1,963,395 revised budget for the general fund.
That's on page
Page 2 of the Munis report.
2.
Will be
Okay.
4 of the total report pages. So it's $1,963,000. And you can see the 489,236 have been paid so far.
I don't want to go too far afield with this because we could talk about this all night, but would it be possible, like when we do the annual budget, to show this bottom line figure for revenues and expenses that are,
We do that every year.
I don't see it. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place, but
Which report are you looking at?
that the budget.
You
that
mean
was-
like at the end of the year, like the annual budget, make sure that we highlight the inflows and outflows?
The budget that is passed by the council and posted on the city's website. I'm referring to that one.
Yeah, the numbers are in there for total revenues and total expenses.
So the
It
total
might not be in
revenue,
there by fund in each variation of the report, because we call the report out for all the city funds. It gives you the bottom line total per fund, but we can certainly run it as a total per fund,
I think
just
it
like
would
it
be
shows in
helpful.
this.
I think that would be helpful if we could do that in the future.
We've been doing that all along.
No, I mean, to show that for each fund,
We do normally.
the revenues and the expenses.
Yeah, in this report every month, it shows it, and the budget's there too.
Counselor Kelly, are you looking at not only just the breakdowns of revenues and expenses per fund, but a consolidation of everything into one kind of high level top line report?
I'd have to pull it up here and look at it and explain it to you.
Okay.
But I don't really want to do that here because it may just be an issue that I'm having and nobody else.
We can go over it. All you have to do is, give me a shout or come in and I can go over the reports with you.
Is that okay if I
Yes.
give Richard a call?
Sure.
Okay, I will do that.
And that 5-year forecast, the numbers have been updated from that from 2016 all the way through 2020 with the 2021 budget in there. And that's just the general fund totals. I think I had that out June 9th in that worksheet.
Oh, okay, yes, yes,
Yeah. So all those numbers are in there too.
okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Sorry, Andrew.
No, that's okay. Those are all the questions I had for now. I'm sure I'll have more, but
One thing,
it was a big document and there's so much in there to digest and,
And the monthly report's a big document too. There's a lot of information, but if you ever need to go over what anything means, just give me a shout, come in, and we'll sit down and go over the report.
yeah, I would really like that, if that's okay with you, Mayor. And how would you like us to coordinate that? Can we just do it by email request and then coordinate schedule? Is that okay with you?
Fine.
All right. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate
Okay.
that.
Specific to this year-end report, I have experience in the past at the county that we would just bring in the auditor and just have them do something like this, like a more formal presentation, and just go through the document, highlight any like major concerns or considerations that they have, and we can ask them questions in that capacity, but it keeps it separate from trying to fit this major document into everything else. So we'll look forward to the future of doing that.
Okay.
2.3 discussion on unappropriated budget adjustments and corresponding expenditures. This is something that we started last month, or maybe the month prior, to
Last month.
outline, hey, these are things come up, things happen, or we find investment opportunities in the city to spend money on or spend funds on that we hadn't previously spent or planned for spending. So this report is an outline of those expenditures and a summary of everything, of all the expenditures as well. Overall, we've invested about $180,000 into our parks and beaches, $245,000 in operations, which includes some emergency concerns that we've had, like the septic pump at the police station failed, and we didn't want to just give them a hand pump. We wanted to fix it. So emergency things, including IT spending that we hadn't planned for before we, investing into our IT infrastructure. Some of these things are also reimbursable. $109,000 of those funds were reimbursed through grant opportunities when it came to general fund expenditures for Harborside Master Plan and the corresponding grant that kind of paid us back for spending that. So.
And I'm going from memory, the total of the, excuse me, the total of the unappropriated budget is almost $700,000.
Correct. If you add everything up without backing out those bits that don't necessarily come out of the general fund. For example, there was an $80,000 water sewer activated charcoal expenditure that was not budgeted for this year, but we expended that money. That was out of the water sewer fund. The $109,000 for the Harborside Master Plan, again, that was a grant. And then there was some accounting from last year where we had put vehicles on a PO. They didn't get paid out last year, but that money got reclaimed for 2020 and then got pushed into 2021. So it was budgeted, didn't get spent, got pushed into 2021. We spent it in 2021. So, but it does account on here because it doesn't look like it was appropriated in 2021. In total, I would say that number realistically hovers around 400,000 in unappropriated expenditures. And
Because you've got reimbursable money.
correct.
One of the items that's actually on our agenda tonight, what is the turnaround time for the reimbursement for some of these things?
Right,
Like the Harborside
like the grant, like the
Yes, yeah.
that's already been reimbursed.
Oh,
So
it's okay.
that's, yeah, right. So the city expended, we apply that money to DOS, correct, Ethan? And then they say, okay, well, you're starting that process and you spent the money, so here's your reimbursement. In total, it was about 400,000, rounding around. And even if you split that out, some of it was emergency spending, as I mentioned, or unexpected emergency spending like IT infrastructure, sewer infrastructure for PD. And if you look at if you look at the expenditures like that were indicative of investing in the beach, the amount of money that we put into the beach, hiring Saratoga Associates who's here today to talk about their plan, that is more closer to around 200 to 250 in those types of expenditures, separated from more emergency expenditures. Any other questions about that? 2.4 sale of real property and fund allocation. As the council knows, we recently approved contract to sell real property in the tune of about $150,000. We also have another piece of property listed for sale, or about to be listed for sale, right here at Miller Street. Considering the other properties that we do have that we would like to maintain, I'd certainly like to get a nod from this council to say, of the money that we're taking in from the sale of real property, I'd like to invest it back into the property that we currently have, specifically the gym. We do have a spending resolution tonight to improve the windows, to fix the windows. It's a minor $7,000. But with $100,000 could go a significant way with the gym specifically. You know, I've heard a number of times people on the council say we want to be good landlords. We want to invest and fix the properties that we do have. I think this would be a fantastic opportunity to do that without chipping or chipping into unappropriated funds that we currently have set aside. And I'm not looking at all of that proceed going into that building, but certainly looking at some of the more emergency fixes, the windows, taking a serious look at the HVAC system, because we knew during COVID that was a major hurdle for us to get somebody in that facility. They need some work on the floor, need some work downstairs as well. So, you know, as we kind of identify a number of these projects, I would certainly like to be able to come back to this council and say, of the money that we made selling this other piece of property, let's invest it back into what we got, essentially.
I like that idea. Okay.
2.5, discussion of sales tax update. We did get numbers from the county in terms of our sales tax receipts. 2021, we budgeted $3.9 million in sales tax receipts. If we were to project out the last Q2 report, we were about 66%, 65% of what we had budgeted already halfway through the year, which then pans out to just over $500,000 if we keep maintaining this trajectory of sales tax receipts, which is good. You know, for us, it's a good economic indicator that people are still shopping local. We still got visitors. We still have people buying durable goods, cars, buying gas, washing machines, things like that. So we'll come back to this. If we do maintain this trajectory, it'll be a little bit higher than the 2018, 2019 numbers as well, which is good. So maintain that and keep pressing on the border opening. Any questions about that? Okay, moving on to 2.6, draft resolution authorizing budget transfer of general and rec complex funds overtime. I'll take a motion. Motion, Councilor Gibbs, second, Councilor Canales. Discussion. This is a transfer of already available budgeted funds into an overtime fund to cover a significant amount of work that has needed to be covered by our rec leader to manage the beaches and parks, as well as the planning assistant to help with the planning board minutes and the work that person's been doing in that area, rather than continuing to use their comp time, which I believe it may be that their comp time has been expended already. We're looking at funding an overtime budget for the rest of the year from already budgeted funds. Any other discussion?
And that was, excuse me, 4,000?
Correct, 4,000 total.
Yes.
8,000 total. 4,000 in CDO, 4,000.
4,000,
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you're right.
yeah, it's 4,000 total.
Yep.
Yeah.
2,000 of that being transferred from the general fund to direct complex fund.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the caveat there.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2.7 draft resolution authorized budget transfer general rec complex funds to gym repairs. Motion, Counselor Gibbs, second Counselor Moore. As discussed before, this item is specifically to repair the windows. $6,000 to repair the windows, I think is pretty reasonable. It's not, is it every window?
It's not every window. All the windows over there are in bad shape. This would fix all the windows that are completely busted out and have been replaced with plywood, or the ones that are broken and there is jagged glass in the paint. It's the safety issue.
It's got to be done.
Yes. But going back to our previous discussion, you can understand why.
Mhm.
Spend some money on repairing this gym. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Aye.
Oh, hey, there she is. Welcome, Counselor Bob. Okay. 2.8 draft resolution authorizing revision to the capital expenditure plan adopted December 23rd, 2014. Motion, Counselor Canales, second Counselor Gibbs. Discussion. So this was a bond that was allocated in 2015, Rich? 2015, 2014, when was that bond allocated?
2017.
2017? Okay, for 350,000. It's already bonded, it's already borrowed, sitting in the bank, waiting to be spent on the projects that it was allocated to. This is an increase, a small increase to the window replacement project in City Hall. No other project is getting extra funds except for this project. And we're later on down the line, we'll talk about the expenditures, which has to do with asbestos monitoring and abatement.
So is this 350,000 going to go towards funding this $600,000 bill?
Part of it is there's already a $250,000 IEP allocation to window replacement. There was a $300,000 DASNY grant for window replacement, and this contributes to the gap that's needed to fill the rest of the work for the abatement, the asbestos abatement. So there's monitoring and there's the actual abatement itself.
Okay, so it's coming from bond, IEEP and
DASNY.
DASNY, so
Correct.
we won't be using, we're not gonna pull that from general fund.
Correct.
It's
It's already-
already
it's-
there.
It's already borrowed, it's already
Okay.
allocated in the earmark for this.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, 3.1, discussion of 2016 waterfront feasibility implementation plan with Saratoga and Associates and SUNY. I had the opportunity earlier this year to, we had the opportunity earlier this year to dust off the 2016 waterfront feasibility plan, engage Saratoga and Associates to come back, review that plan, and put forth a implementation plan or some type of implementation structure for how do we get from that 2016 plan to 2027, 2030 on actually executing that plan. They've done a significant amount of work out there thus far in partnership with SUNY Environmental Science. Yeah, fair enough. A number of students. I do have to call out Devin Bushy here because she's one of my favorite people in the world. She worked at the beach and with her team of other students to actually go through the forest, I guess, what would you call it? The crepe forest back there, the wooded area, to map out a new trail system. So I'd like to invite them to review their plan and answer any questions that we may have. And the implementation plan was emailed as part of the packet as well, so everybody will have this. If you need a copy, I can provide my copy.
Thank you for hearing our findings at the City Beach Trail Restoration. My name is Tierney Mayette, and this is Devin and Lori.
Those practical, and what this does is what we have done within the past few months, and also what we have done in the last few months is we, Jeremy and Kevin, have created a that lists the trails of the Promotion Avenue and former Rocky Trail. And the things that are flagged, like debris removal, plants and invasive species, and also the regular plants. And it also discusses future plans for collaboration with our Saratoga associates and City of Plattsburgh and also City of Plattsburgh.
So us three interns, we met every Sunday for the last 10 weeks for around 2 or 3 hours at the site. We walked along Scomotion Avenue, which is the paved trail between the beach and the wooded area where we were developing our trail. We used a GPS Garmin device to map our trail and mark along it georeference points for debris for removal from either rock eater or waste, as well as invasive species or nuisance species. We used iNaturalist, which is a mobile device app. We went in and used that for tagging all of the species and identifying them. All of the natural assets such as the sand dunes and species of interest were also noted on iNaturalist as well as in our mapping system. And we plugged this all into ArcMap, which is a GIS program, and use that to develop our map. So we went through and we flagged the trail with flagging tape. So right now there is a preliminary trail through the woods back there. Hazards and debris were flagged with both tape and on our GPS systems. The potential with this is that Saratoga Associates can now go through and work with the city in removing debris and further developing a trail. And as I said, plans were identified using iNaturalist, which is a citizen science app, and all of the invasive plants and natural assets were identified.
So this is the map that we ended up creating. So the dark blue line, that's the potential trail that we flagged and georeferenced with the handheld GPS device. We believe that the end toward the Craig Center may have potentially been the previous Rock Eater Trail. We did find a lot of obstacle courses that may have been used for the Rock Eater course. And then the lighter blue line represents the paved Scomotion Avenue trail that already exists there. And then the yellow line is what we call the beach trail. It is partially like boardwalked, but towards the end, more towards like the apartment buildings down on the other side. There's a lot of like man-made walking paths that look like they have been previously mowed, but they're not being well maintained. But they do seem like it would be a good potential trail system to add to the area. And then the brownish points on the map, mostly towards the potential trail, indicate debris that need to be removed. Some of the more notable ones include rock eater debris, this big 40-foot concrete pipe that we saw, large spools, debris from the old dump site that used to be there. And then any of the unmarked points were just kind of like a bunch of random scattered debris, like broken glass or random tires. And then the green points on the map are the plants that we identified and tagged. And on the next slide, the numbers that are located on the points will have identified the species that were there. So these are the species. There was quite a few invasive species. Some of the most common was honeysuckle, buckthorn, Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard. And then there was also nuisance species like poison ivy and stinging nose, which can be problem species for people who are utilizing the trails if they are not familiar with the effects that these species can have if they come in contact with them.
Right, so these are the trail conditions that we face, and, you know, slow motion of the motion out of the trail. Yeah, what was said, with the rockier debris, moderate plant overgrowth, and, there's a lot of like invasive species. In the potential trail, there was, a lot of debris need to be removed. And, also a lot of plant overgrowth. And also, the invasive species we encountered there were also hazards, like fallen branches we saw, and trees. On the beach trail, we very frequently encounter poison ivy, which could be a problem in our future plans.
So as I said, along Scomotion Avenue, there are some larger pieces of debris that would take a lot more power for taking out in the trail. Like this tire obstacle was like one of the first things you encounter a couple feet into our trail. All the debris has been flagged for removal. These things are larger debris that are mostly aesthetically displeasing to the trail, more than they are hazardous. But removal of them would improve aesthetic as well as improve habitat for the wildlife. And for smaller debris seems to be the bigger issue along the trail. As you guys know, this used to be a dump site, and there's a lot of litter in the area. Specifically, we had litter on our potential site, or specific litter we had on our potential site was a lot of broken glass, dumped tires, and miscellaneous metal waste. So shattered glass and litter are a larger hazard because they can harm people trying to recreate on the trail, and it will take more work to actually pick up that type of litter. Yeah, work for cleanup. As far as constructing the trail, several issues that we'll encounter are fallen trees that some of them are quite large and there's no real way around them. You have to take them down in order to construct the trail. Chainsaw is going to be needed to clear part of the path. Chemical treatment to treat the poison ivy, which you frequently encounter along the beach path, as well as a large portion of the trail is very overgrown with goldenrod, around 6 feet tall. So I know the city just got a new brush hog, so that would be easily cleared just going through with the brush hog and opening up that space for a trail to go through.
Okay, so there's 3 different unique areas that exist within the trails. The first being the forested area that exists along like the potential trail and the Scomotion Avenue trail. 2 species that we frequently came in common or encountered with were the meadow anemone and the blue flag iris. Another ecosystem was the riparian the area that exists along the lake and the wetland area. Black locust was frequent there, as well as the rough horsetail. And then in the dune area, bighead sedge and grapevines was frequented. Grapevine was actually often like entangled along the bighead sedge. And as you can see, like the species that are existing in these 3 different areas are very different, which provides people, the opportunity to see species that they might not come in contact with on an everyday basis. So some of the invasive or nuisance species that we come across include Japanese knotweed, which is the large leaf plant at the top. This species is a problem because it grows very tall. There's actually a big patch of it towards the end of Smotion Avenue. It's probably about 6 feet tall, and it prevents native plant species from being able to grow and colonize an area. Honeysuckle is also a similar invasive species that we came in contact with a lot. It just dominates the area and doesn't let any native species grow in the area. The rugosa roses, they're very pretty, but they are also invasive. We did come across, I believe, 2 different patches, one more towards the crate and then another patch towards the end of the actual paved Smotion Avenue trail. And then as we previously mentioned, poison ivy was frequent. Although it's not invasive, it is a nuisance species since it can cause irritation to the skin if you come in contact with it. Buckthorn is another invasive species that inhibits the growth of native species in the area. This was also a species that we came in contact with a lot. And then the last species is stinging nettles. It also is a nuisance species like poison ivy and can cause skin irritation if you come in contact with it, similar to poison ivy. And then just some more species that we found. Jewelweed is a common one. Goldenrod, as Devin mentioned, there's big stands of goldenrod. Field horsetail, milkweed, Virginia creeper, and then the grapevines. Virginia creeper is in a lot of areas on the both the potential trail and Smotion Avenue trail. And
So, we have to find a lot of challenges, such as, there's just a large, huge sections of litter and debris. Some usually broke glass, which took up a portion of our coast trail. A lot of fallen trees, and tree branches, which is an obstacle to get around our trail. And poison ivy is found in sections of the coast trail. And it's already on the beach line, so that will have to be a major thing that we have to deal with.
For site potentials, developed trails are going to encourage people to come and visit the beach for recreation and just foster a greater appreciation with the community for local environment. Additions of potential birdhouses and interpretive signs along the trails could also add some environmental value to the land. Potential for community involvement. We were thinking maybe volunteer trail building events, birdhouse painting events. We were even thinking like play areas, nature-based play areas. Establishing new trails connecting to Smotion Avenue would repurpose a neglected area. It would not only repurpose a neglected area, but it would increase green spaces in Plattsburgh, which I'm sure over the last year, many of us have learned are more in value than we can ever imagine. And overall just foster a relationship between the university and our involvement in this project, as well as with the city. Yeah. So these are some of the pictures of things we were thinking of, like birdhouses, small playgrounds. Picture of the interpretive sign is not on there, but the Ruger Woods, if you've seen it, has a lot of interpretive signs that the university's already worked on. So something along those lines, pointing out certain species of plants people might not be aware of, or migratory birds, or natural history of the land. And we would just like to also thank all of our professors and Saratoga Associates for assistance in this project.
Thank you so much. That was really
Yeah.
fantastic.
Any questions about the work that those folks did with the beach trails?
Well, I do have some questions, not necessarily about the work they've done, but the results and information that they're giving us.
Yeah.
What are, if any, barriers or steps we would have to go through to
Thank
do the kinds of cleanup that are necessary? So for example,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, if I understand, this was at one time the official dump of Clinton County, wasn't it? Or a town dump or a city dump or
City.
whatever.
Cool. So,
Okay,
Yeah.
so what would it require to get that completely cleaned up? Would it be like a DEC involvement? Would
Yeah.
it just be something we could do locally? What
No,
would that
I'll
entail?
say this, part of the reason to, and I appreciate the question, and part of the reason why I said, hey, why don't we engage some environmental science students to go up there and do this work, is reclaiming and remediating and reclaiming that parcel for green space, for activity, increases our quality of life, health, living, and attractiveness. Right now, we could certainly start blazing trails in there, and I would like to see us do a little bit of that initial work of blazing the trail, doing some of that initial just on the surface cleanup. Part of what has already been identified in that 2016 waterfront feasibility study is a remediation of the landfill.
Mhm.
It's not impossible. It's pricey, but it's not impossible. There are probably some grants that we can tap into and start to phase develop into this remediation. But part of what Saratoga Associates did identify in 2016, and what they've also identified in their implementation plan, is that level of remediation of going in there, probably doing a little bit of geotechnical mining and trying to figure out where things are actually at, what's actually in there, and start to dig some of that stuff out. $2 million of a price tag. It's not insurmountable, but it's pricey, right? So, but that is also something that we've known about it, and that area has a rich history in Plattsburgh. Something that we want to highlight, something that we want to enhance as part of the beach development. It's not just making the beach look pretty, but it's telling the story about the beach, about the folks at Scamotion Creek. That there was an enclave of people that did live there as well, and telling that narrative of the city beach.
So one of the things that the students mentioned is these informational panels that exist in the woods behind the field house, and they really are fantastic. I think, and I don't know what the feeling is of the rest of the council, but when we look at like the whole scope of what the cost is going to be, that seems daunting. Perhaps there would be a way for us to break it down into phases and chunks and pay, find a way to pay along the way. Rather, I don't know if that's something the council thinks is possible, or if Saratoga Associates think this would be possible, but instead of saying, well, we can't do this unless we allocate $2 million and then it just sits and nothing happens, could we come up with a plan where it's done in phases and we budget for those various phases? I would love to see something like that happen, and also engage the company that, or the company that we pay to look into grants for us.
Well,
to get them all engaged.
let's dig into this, because it's exactly what they've been doing this summer, was taking a look at that plan, breaking it out into a number of phases, identifying funding opportunities in partnership with Barton and Lejudas, and then bringing forth a phased implementation plan with what years we could actually start to target the development of that. Already, they have been working with Barton and Lejudas to identify two $500,000 grants for a period. Why don't you just get up? I'm giving his presentation right now.
Matt. He's got an air conditioner.
Oh, there's one right behind you too.
I know, but I think that was gonna interfere with.
Yeah, all the questions were being asked while I was.
I mean, what am I doing?
You were making it very easy
You
for me,
sit
Mayor.
And I'll stay over there. How about that?
Well, I hope the presentation can address some of your questions, because really our objective over the last few months has been, our services have been attained by the city to come up with the implementation plan. As the mayor indicated, what we wanted to do is come up with a plan that is specific to how we can do this project. I mean, it's great to, these pictures are really easy. It's a guy sitting in front of an easel for a day and it's out. There's a $75 million price tag attached to this in certain ways. And it's like, how do we start breaking this off in a way that's achievable? Now, I think the first step that was taken by the students of SUNY Plattsburgh, because that was not just a feel good, go out in the field and come up with some a really good presentation stuff. It was the first step in field reconnaissance in the old dump area to determine where we could go forward, specifically with the development of a trail, development of infrastructure in manageable pieces. The mayor indicated that we were looking specifically at grants and things we could get funded. We have had we have put our heads together with Barton and LaJudas as to the most implementable plan in terms of putting the city in a position to procure the most in funding that is available on an annual basis. Now, one thing I will say, and I'm sure you folks are aware of this, is that Albany really likes grants to feed upon other grants, so it guarantees success. But you have got to uphold your end of the bargain for that to happen. So what we're going to talk about today is taking this tens of millions of dollars project and breaking it down into implementable pieces. The first piece is really the things that we've been focusing on over the last few months in terms of identifying prices, identifying contractors, identifying quotes, identifying schedules, so people can get out in the field and do the investigation this fall to give the city the information for this winter to develop, evaluate the information, and develop the designs to go forward. Now, the first step of that was what Devin and her friends did. And Devin, I think you volunteered to do all the work this winter as well, right? Okay, thank you. So what we'll do is, you're fine. So implementation, and we really got down in the cost because this is a finance committee meeting. You want to really look at what the finances are. And we'll drill down a little bit more with respect to the types of investigations, because Councilor, you were asking about what are the next steps, what can be done, dealing with the remediation, and the mayor indicated there was a $2 million price tag. That's an estimate based off, professional experience. However, there is an environmental site investigation that is on board to be conducted this fall for $15,000, which will tell you how you can best mitigate that existing contamination. It does not necessarily have to all be removed. Some of it could be capped in place. It may be inert. It may be something that we could work around. It may be educational just in terms of what has been done. And I do believe there are pieces that the DPW and the city can do if it is just trash out there and there's no environmental concerns other than, just moving large debris. So here's our site, and this is the overview. And we broke it into phases that we really thought would make sense. And we started small and we worked big. And you can look at what the prices are. Like we go like the first 3 years, each phase is 3 years. And it's about $8 million in the first phase. It's over 30 in the second, and it's over 30 in the third. But it's about what is real and what's implementable. And I also think there's an element here where you look at where private investment is going to become interested. We want to lay the groundwork for private investment to see this as a good investment. Many like hotels or other agencies of folks dealing with recreation really look to see if the community has skin in the game. That's really important, and it makes it easier to sell this to potential private interests if you have these things in the works. So investigation in developing the infrastructure, the pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, because you want to get people using the trails 12 months a year, not just in the nice weather. Let's make this part of daily life for people. Then you look at the second phase is where you start to increase the site amenities. You add more programming elements. You give more people to go down there. I was down at City Beach today. A couple gentlemen walked by. They said, this is really pretty, but there's nothing to do. We want to solve that. And I think in the presentation with our friends from Plattsburgh, it was, there was ideas coming up. We had a brainstorming session in terms of things that could be done. You want to address every demographic in your community. If you want SUNY Plattsburgh to have as much skin in the game as anyone else that lives in the city, give them things to do. And finally, the phase 3 is the big ticket items. It's like a great long, it's a performance venue. It's like turning this into something like SPAC North or something along those lines for Saratoga Performing Arts Center, for those that don't have Saratoga in their name. So we have this color coded in yellow, blue, and the, what would you call that? Rose, Ethan?
Maybe like salmon.
Okay, we're gonna go with salmon for that. And that just shows how this has developed over time. And we'll come back to this image, so I won't spend too much time on it. So if you look at phase 1, this is the time period from 2021 to 2023, as the mayor indicated. There is the investment and the consulting services, and if you see on the top there, there are 3 different forms of investigation. There is the archaeological, which is like identifying if we have indigenous peoples remains. That was a pretty prolific fishing area on Scomotion. Any additional remnants from the War of 1812. I know we have folks that are buried there from the War of 1812. Anything else specific to perhaps the Revolutionary War? And then going back to the more recent histories of the landfill, and also when folks lived there, like kind of a squatters camp during the Depression. So you look at that. That's the archaeological. The environmental is exactly what you had questions about. It's identifying the extent and the lineal extent, and also the concentration of contamination. Is this something to worry about? Is it not? That's been there a long time. There's a lot of sand base there. There is a real possibility that most of the contamination that was there has been far diluted, has been washed away with the changing the water table over time. That's not uncommon. The stuff that we saw out there, you know, historically, all the cars and whatnot, that would not be a major issue. That stuff would be mitigated over time. They call it phytoremediation or natural attenuation. Mother Nature tends to break things down if there's enough oxygen. But that's what has to be identified in that investigation. So the $2 million price tag could be real, or it could be less, or it could be something that could be handled internally if it's rendered.
Would that be identified with that environmental investigation?
Yeah, because that money associated with that's for they're basically going to go around on a track rig. They're going to poke holes in the ground. They want to get water samples around there, and they sample it. They sample it for metals, hydrocarbons, semi-volatile organic compounds, PCBs, and chlorofluorocarbons, things that were like in refrigerators and air conditioners way back in the day. The next is the geotechnical investigation. You want to have connectivity, but you also want to have people have somewhere to go to. So we're looking at putting in a couple of piers. One would be more for boat traffic, like for water taxis to get people around the lake from various communities. The other one would be more of a pedestrian promenade. You could have fishing, other activities out there. The programming still has to be done, but it's absolutely, those things are magnets for attracting people. However, you have to do the geotechnical investigation to make sure you design this properly. You could put in piles for a pier that are 20 feet deep, 20 feet in length, and that's totally fine. But if you don't have any resistance or firm substrate you're going into, you might have to go 50 feet. So you could be going from a $400,000 pier to a $1.2 million pier pretty quickly. You want to know this stuff sooner rather than later. Okay. And wetland delineation is obviously very important. Devin, if they find a wetland out there, you're gonna owe me $1, just so you know. Okay, I'll take it. We're in a pandemic, I do what I have to. So the wetland delineation is something in which we want to determine where the wetlands are because we can't build through them. We can go over them. You can put boardwalks, but you can't displace them. And that's something that's part of the reconnaissance of figuring out where everything goes. The information that the students gather is absolutely part of this entire reconnaissance. Yeah. And finally, it's a site survey. We don't have a site survey more recent than in the last 25 or 27 years, something like that. So we want to have that updated. That's the first thing anyone's going to want to look at. What's your survey? What's your meets and bounds with respect to potentially breaking off pieces of the property or developing that? So phase 2, that gets more, and I won't talk about this in as much detail, but this is more of the amenities that you would have specific to building off that infrastructure investment, the investigation of the first 3 years. You have program elements, site improvements, Skomotion Creek access for kayak launch, which I think could be wonderful. New construction of buildings, building a little density, some more programming elements along the waterfront, and creating some more softscape. As you get into phase 3, these, as I said, these are the big ticket items. A great lawn, parking, this is all very conceptual because goodness knows what we're going to have ultimately or what the ultimate shape is in that area. But that's kind of our idea right now that we're working with. That's part of the blueprint as the mayor has identified it previously. So if you go back to this, this is the entire plan. So you can see the yellows are the first steps. And if you look specifically at what we're talking about right now, those first 4 items are addressed in the first 3 years. And elements of that are going to all be influenced by the investigatory work that would occur this fall. So the mayor talked about B&L coming up with some really good grant opportunities. They really identified it. I would take a step back. They looked at not just making a cash grab for putting all these things out there. They wanted to have a strategic approach so that you could have grants to where it puts the next grant application in 2022 in better position. And then we worked with them in terms of identifying specifically what programs and what elements in our design we would allocate the monies to so that we could build off that. And both of these tie into infrastructure because the parks development, we'd be looking at tying in the entire trails network together by next year, which I think is really, really important because it's going to bring more people. And the other one is shoreline stabilization, looking at beach restoration. As an environmental engineer, the biggest challenge you have with respect to all the blowing sands and the sand erosion is the degradation of your sand dunes over time. So that really has to be evaluated. And there's a lot of, we have been doing that evaluation and we've identified some strategies. Some of them are fairly low cost with respect to restoring our dunes. Now, the thing you do after you restore the dunes is you have to reestablish your vegetation to hold the dunes in place. Those things are just so important, particularly for City Beach, because the prevailing southerly winds will continue to come in there. It's just set up perfectly for the sand to continue to blow in there. So you have to mitigate that. And that's an important first step, trying to mitigate that. So the remainder of 2021, we've been talking, I was really impressed with what the students came up with today. And we're looking at the next things they can do. Because I think if there's certain things that get cleared, there's even more the city the SUNY can get involved with, because it is really important to really foster a strong linkage, as was indicated in that presentation, between the college and the city. So that's an important next step. We also want to make sure we have our ducks in a row specific to the dune restoration and preservation. We've talked to experts in Vermont, Champlain Valley, the preserve the program, what's it, Lake Champlain Basin Program. Those are the folks. Normally an engineer does pretty good with acronyms, but not today. We're presenting to them next month with respect to this, and possibly be in line for future grants or even technical advice that is specific to Lake Champlain. And so we're doing that, and then we would also like to move forward with the site survey, the archaeological investigation, the geotechnical investigation, the environmental investigation, the wetlands delineation, and the landfill delineation this fall. Those were the numbers, if you want to go back. We identified those costs here in this column, specific to, those are hard costs in terms of real quotes. We've solicited tens, dozens of quotes across the board for this, and we got a lot of responses. All of this can be completed this fall. We spoke, and the mayor asked us, it's like, when can these people come out here if this gets approved? And we said, and so I reached out to them, and to a firm, it all would be completed before Thanksgiving, quite easily. Our biggest delay would be with respect to the barge, because that gets to do the geotech boring, because that gets quite backlogged. And if you look at 2022 costs, you see a number there of $4.6 million. But after the grants and pulling stuff out specific to matching of the grants, it's $3.3 million. If you look in the green, that is specific to the monies associated with the wetlands and EPF grant. And in the salmon, Ethan, you see the dune restoration and the infrastructure, fencing, retaining walls covering that grant. So that's how that's covered. It doesn't cover the full nut. There's still $3 million out there. But the one thing we do have is this is an implementation plan, but it's an implementation plan that gets implemented as funding's available. So it's like, we've worked with many communities where we've had comprehensive plans and stuff, and implementation of those plans has taken decades. I'm not saying that's always preferable, because we want to get things done, but you have to act when monies are available and when opportunity strikes. So that was, and that's the next steps for the mid-range phase. And finally, down the road, that's the last piece of the implementation plan. That would be phase 3. Total estimated costs. This has tons of caveats in it. This is like doing a number like this is pinning the tail on the donkey with a live donkey, because there's just a lot of moving parts here, and there's inflation, there's a lot of unknowns. So $75 million is our best guesstimate from an engineering perspective. Very comfortable with phase 1, but phase 2 and those other things will be changed based on what the ultimate programming of the beach is. That's it. So I'd love to answer any questions that I didn't address in that presentation.
I don't have any.
All right. Well, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly would like to, certainly take temperature on looking at the construction part of that phase 1, which is some investment from the city. For us, as a community, looking at the beach as that crown jewel that we do want to invest in, even though we do, look at spending money on geotechnical services, landfill delineation, and other of those more foundational, that foundational work that needs to happen. That money does become matches for future grants. So it's not just money that we then spend, say, hey, great, we have a report, but we then take that money and say, yeah, we spent $135,000, $150,000 on this, the initial work, but we also have skin in the game. And that really, quite frankly, is what grantors look for as well, so. Any further discussion on that?
There's a lot to consider. I'm all for it, but we have to figure out how we're gonna pay for it, how is it gonna happen? So there's a lot for me to digest. I do support it, but there's a lot to digest.
So, I mean, like, it's a $70 million project, right? Over the next probably 10, 15, 20 years. So we're just talking about this kind of like what it looks like initially and what we can do right now. That's going to really set the tone forward. 3.2, discussion on the city's revolving loan fund audit report, phase 1. Ann is here to discuss that work. As a reminder, the city has an economic development revolving loan fund that has been fairly dormant for the last several years. The audit was provided to the council for review. If you need a copy, we handed out a copy as well. And if you'd like to come up to talk about the audit, the initial audit, second to this is going to be a resolution authorizing the second phase of this audit, which would be engaging with Ann to create an actual administrative program around these funds.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Ethan, you're going to be my production person over there? Okay, that'll be good. I'll move that close. Well, about January of 2021, I was engaged by the city of Plattsburgh to take a deep dive into the various revolving loan funds that Matt and the Community Development Office and Rick from the Finance Department were concerned about in terms of what can you or can you not do as a municipality with these funds. We could go on to the next slide. Ethan. Okay, go on one more. I'm going to present a summary of the report. I'm not going to go through every page in the report and all the schedules in the report, but I'm more than happy to do that after you've had a chance to read through that, if that's something you want to do. I want to first start with an explanation of who I am and what am I doing helping the city of Plattsburgh. And I have been involved in community development and planning in the North Country since 1977. I worked for both Essex County and Clinton County as a circuit rider in the community development programs that were established in the planning offices back in the day. And then I went on to form my own nonprofit organization called the Friends of Keysville, which ultimately became the Friends of the North Country. And I grew that organization from a staff of 2.5 to a staff of 13 and an administrative budget from $38,000 to $20 million in funds that we were administering, grant funds for other municipalities. I think we represented 20 municipalities over the course of Clinton, Essex, and Franklin County in the 21 years I ran that organization. We did a lot of grant administration and management work. Were recruited by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to troubleshoot for them and do some sort of investigating work. And then for the last 21 years, I've been a freelance consultant. I've taught adjunct at SUNY Plattsburgh and at Antioch University in the environmental studies programs, political science programs, public policy programs. So I want to start by re-emphasizing for the city councilors and for the mayor the importance of city governance and the fiduciary responsibilities and trustee responsibilities you have for public funds. And so I was involved with trying to answer some questions in the context of what your responsibilities are as a city government. Next slide, Ethan. There were 4 questions that were raised by the Community Development Office and the Finance Department that they wanted me to answer. The first one was, what are the sources of the funds capitalizing the 3 revolving funds? How much capital is in each fund? Are any of the funds attributable to New York State's Small Cities Program? That becomes important for this discussion. If so, how much? Do you hold any funds in trust for the state of New York? What are your obligations to the state of New York with regard to this? And to investigate that piece a little further. Number 3, is there any funding attributable to the federal government, to the federal U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development? Again, if so, how much? What do you hold any in trust for the federal government? And if so, what are the standards and practices that need to be considered? And number 4, since the program policies and procedures hadn't been evaluated at the city level since 2018, and in some cases earlier than that, what kind of high-level recommendations could I make? Now, I have, as I said, I hate to say it, it's almost 45 years experience working with the CDBG program, plus probably about 100 other programs, both at the federal and the state levels. And so I really was concerned about looking into this and giving you the best advice I can give you. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. I come from a family of CPAs and attorneys. So I know I don't have a license to practice in that regard. Next slide, Ethan. So there are 3 pots of money that the city has historically had used for projects, community development projects. The Housing Fund, which has lots of different names associated with it. The Economic Development Fund, which also has lots of different names associated with it. And the Facade Program, which has numbers after it, 1, 2, 3, 4. These constitute revolving loan programs that have been in place for various periods of time, depending on which fund we talk about. Next slide. Ethan. This is probably the most detailed slide I have in the presentation for you. And why it's important is because it identifies the sources and uses and the balances in these various accounts. The column on the left, on your left, revolving loan fund titles are really important because they're tied to bank accounts. And that was really important in tracing this down. The sources of funds, it was very interesting research that was done on this. The Economic Development Fund basically has 2 things in it. It has federal CDBG money in it, Community Development Block Grant money, that was repaid to the city from prior loans or a part of earlier capital grants. But it also has some pre-1987 money, which relates to funds that were granted to the city of Plattsburgh under what's called the Urban Development Action Grant Program, which is still on the books, but it's dead. It's a stale program. It's zero funded. And so that was important because distilling the difference between UDAG funding and CDBG funding has a lot to do with what you can do with the money, what you can't do with the money, et cetera. The housing account, on the other hand, was exclusively funded through federal CDBG program income. When I use the term program income, what's important, Elizabeth, you mentioned before in the audit report, understanding the technical terms that they're using on the audit level. Program income isn't actually a term defined in the statute and in the regulations of the Community Development Block Grant Program. And program income is basically money that is repaid to the city from the loans that were made, plus whatever interest on the loans or fees that are charged for those loans. So it's the money that comes in, but it's related to the program. That's the best way. It's a nice explicit term. The facade money is very important in the sense that it predates the CDBG program funds in many ways. And it has a long history in the city from the urban renewal days, back in the 60s. We had the urban renewal program, which was a blessing and a curse to most municipalities because it took large swaths of the Bronx, Brooklyn, any of the inner cities, and basically displaced all the residents and turned it into rubble. But that same funding came to the city of Plattsburgh for different urban renewal projects, which I believe were up on the north end of town, what we're talking about, which is interesting. But anyhow, those were funds that the city recaptured and actually created a reserve account for. And there was a history of that. I found the resolutions. It was quite interesting. So when you move over towards the right-hand side of this, we've been able to distinguish and at least identify pots of money, which was a process in itself. And what you end up with, more or less, is about almost $3 million of money in these three accounts, the smallest of which is the facade funds. But then that represents about $125,000 plus some additional funds that may have been put in the other accounts that needs to move back. Richard's working on that. That is money that is your money, I would say. It has a history with the UDAG program, but that facade money doesn't have many strings attached to it. The housing and economic development funds, on the other hand, are federal funds that you have had, you're holding in trust, if you will, for the federal government. So there are strings attached to those funds. And there's about $2.7 million in that account. The good news is that I don't think you have to return it to anybody, as long as you use it in the right way, which is really the good news as far as I'm concerned. Next slide. Next question that we had to do with was the status of the city's obligations to the state of New York. Beat the next slide. Okay. Funding funds attributable to New York State. Why does this matter? Who cares? Whether it's the federal government or the state government. Well, it matters because the state government is in the habit of wanting to take money back from municipalities if it's extra. Okay, and program income could be considered extra. What we were able to do is, in a sense, distill or tease apart all the money that the city has gotten for at least 16 to 20 years and going further back than that. And we were able to determine how much you got from the state government and how much you got from the federal government, and whether or not there was any money that was program income affiliated or associated with the state funds. So what we were able to tell you about New York State money, year 2000 is the magic year. And that's important for you to know, because before 2000, the funds, any of the grants that were associated with the Community Development Block Grant Program, Small Cities Program, Entitlement Program, were 100% federal money. The state of New York and the state of Hawaii in 2000 opted to take over the administration and management of the Small Cities Program. Up to that time, they were the two holdouts that didn't have the states running the programs. So in 2000, New York State took over the program, and therefore any program income that you have generated at the city of Plattsburgh since 2000 is attributable as program income to the state of New York and is recapturable by the state of New York. That's the critical piece that I wanted to say. So you've done really well with small cities over time. About $4.5 million since 2000. That's no small chunk of change. But we were able to determine that the city does not hold in trust any program income or bank interest due to New York State. And in the schedules that are attached to the long report are the proof of that. in case we needed, like, so show me if the state controller's office or the small city's office in the New York State came in and said, prove it, we can prove it. We can prove it down to the penny. And that effort, was a team effort by Richard's staff and Matt's staff. It was a tough job, but we did it. Okay, moving on. So I have here in highlighted a couple of things that we found in the process. There was a reporting error that was made by the city in 2020. When I was changed hats at that point, I was helping the Vilas Home with their grant application before you to submit to the Small Cities Program. And one of the required supporting documents that had to go in with the application was a statement of program income from the city. Did you have any program income? Because the state is in the habit of deducting how much you have on hand from the amount they would grant you. That's important to know that for future purposes. So we found a reporting error of $62,000, $63,000, which is a lie. What do we call it? Contingent receivable from the state of New York to the city of Plattsburgh. Whether you'll ever get it is another story. So what we basically have overpaid the state of New York $62,000, and we can prove it. I don't think it would be worthwhile to fight the case to get that money back, because right now I think there's a risk associated with that. And I never knew the state to repay anything that was outstanding. Anyhow, so in the future, when the city gets community development grants, you need to track and segregate and distinguish and recognize those funds very carefully, keep them separate. And we've talked about that with both the finance and the community development department, what they need to do on that. And then you should be able to give the state a report at the end of their fiscal year, which is March 31st. We owe you nothing, we owe you nothing, we owe you nothing, but we have a receivable from you of $62,000. So that's the answer to the question on the state. Let's go on to the federal. Ethan? This is funding that originates with the federal government. This is the big 2.7 million. So we found, and again, this is highlighted in the report, we found that you have interest due to the federal government around before October 31st. At the end of the federal fiscal year is September 30th, and we've actually figured out how much you owe them. And for the last, since 2017. So there's about 29, almost $30,000 of interest, bank interest, because as was mentioned during the audit, public funds have restrictions on whether you can invest public money that from the federal or state governments and then reap the interest from that for program income or for your reuse. And in the case of the federal government, particularly, and the state government with respect to Small Cities Program, you cannot keep the interest earned from the bank account. You must return that. That's part of your fiduciary and trust responsibilities. So the 29,000 is accrued interest on bank accounts, and you'll have to every year, every September, report to the federal government on the status of your programs and also pay your interest back. Okay, and we've talked about that both internally in both departments. Next one. You have compliance standards for the practices you must use with respect to the revolving loan funds. I don't want to say that, if you want to give the money back, if you want to take the $2.4 million and say, okay, we don't want to do this, we'll give it back to the federal government. You can't. There's no rule that says that you can't, but I would recommend that you keep it and spend it. And if you want to keep it and spend it, as city-owned retained funds, then you have to comply with the statutory requirements and practices and standards for the Small Cities Program. And that's pretty straightforward and pretty neat. You've been doing it really since the 1980s anyhow. You just need to formalize your practices. So next slide. So one final note on risk reduction. I sound like the accountant, but I'm sorry, I have no of the lawyers, but I do. So you need to carefully consider as you move forward, both the internal and external capacity issues with respect to how in trust you manage these funds. And even if you subcontract, to Barton LaJudas or whoever, any of the management of a revolving loan fund, the fiduciary responsibilities remains with you. You can't get away from that, right, Dean? That's theirs. And then you're also responsible for compliance and reporting. So even though you can contract services out, you really have to be careful about archiving records, supervising the use and distribution of funds, and making sure that you have the internal control functions in place. You can't get away from that. All right, next slide. All right, so I identified 12 to 15 recommendations. And Matthew, could you hand this to the counselors, please?
Sure.
That's those, oops, I keep getting 12 copies. So, and this is really basically how to revive and comply. How to revive and comply. So let's, Ethan, move to phase 2. And I'm handing out, this is a 2-page table, which I'm handing out to you because it's better in hard copy than this way, which identified all the recommendations in the report, which are at the back of the report. And I color-coded them for you in terms of items that the city finance and city community development department can and will and is doing now, due diligence to catch these things up, and the ones that they had asked if I could do over the next 4 months or so, by Christmas time. And so we've sorted them out. I've priced out my time to work on the items that they feel they don't have the internal capacity to do. And we put the facade program on hold. We just put that to the side for right now. That was the suggestion. And that we really focus on the housing and community development and economic development funds. So by the time January rolls around, you could kick off a marketing program to revive the program and share that with the public and start taking applications and bring people in and help them out. So you have a 2-page there. And that became the basis of the scope of services that Matthew requested for phase 2. And I'll be happy to take any questions from any of you. I know you've been sitting for an hour and
Excellent presentation.
Thank you, Jamie. I didn't want to bore you with all the details, but I figured some of it you really do need to know.
That's very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. Very welcome.
Also complex.
Right. Yeah, the amount of research that went into the report and that this and Rich and his staff, and I'd like to specifically mention the enormous amount of background research.
Shalice has been wonderful. You have a gem there because we were digging, we had to triangulate records and, we were doing legal fact finding. And she had to learn the county clerk filing system. We had paper records, electronic records, it's everywhere. So it's been very good working with your team. You have a good team, and that's an important component of this.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And Richard's been excellent as well. A big help with this. So yes, now we have a team. Now we got to get the second part done and then we can go out to the public with this. Thank you.
That does come up to 3.3 draft resolution authorizing consultant contract for revival of the city's revolving loan fund program phase 2. Motion by Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Canales. That was it. That was the discussion. This is the scope of work. The funding to pay for this scope of work comes out of program fees. It's already paid for from this program. It's not something that we have to pay out of pocket. It's already paid for. Any further discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 3.4, discussion on the updated kiosk system. Matt Miller, I'm gonna pull 3.4 for now. I don't think we need to discuss that right now. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pull it. I'll withdraw 3.4, 3.5 draft resolution authorizing extension of negotiating period with Skyward Hospitality for Harborside Development. Motion by Councilor Canales, second by Councilor Gibbs. Discussion.
This is exciting.
Yes, this is an RFP that went out. Most of you folks know, you may have voted on, positive on this one. Right now, it's just an extension of that negotiating period. As we start to develop the Harborside Master Plan, they can bring back some plans to share with the rest of the council.
So is the proposed site location where it was before? It's the same, or
Yeah, it's the same site location.
Thanks, Ann.
It was becoming increasingly difficult to proceed with the Harborside Master Plan. At the same time, we were essentially negotiating the development of the most important parcel within that master plan footprint. Between subdivision work and working with the planning board and Skyward, we had an internal discussion and we felt that the city's best interests were better served by moving forward with Harborside Master Plan, getting a better sense of exactly what type of, I'm not gonna say what type of development, because we have several studies that say that the hotel is the best use of that property, but how best to fit it within the surrounding area to maximize future opportunities for development and growth of the area.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Draft resolution, approval of visual clearance inspection services for City Hall window asbestos pavement. The 3.6 and 3.7 is what we had already discussed earlier. But I'll take the motion for 3.6. Motion by Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 3.7 draft resolution approval of contract for abatement and replacement of City Hall windows. Motion. Councilor Kelly, second by Councilor Moore. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 3.8 draft resolution approval of artwork installation from City Marina to Betty Little Arts Park, forming the Bassburg Art Trail. Motion by Councilor Canales, second by Councilor Gibbs. Discussion.
What is this exactly?
We are giving you a paintbrush and a stencil, Jeff Moore, and you're gonna paint the town red. No, guess not.
What is this gonna be on?
We'll have outside, the folks from Outside Art come up and present on the proposal. Yeah, why not? And Ethan looks like he's ready to jump in there too. Awesome, thank you.
I'm Amy Guglielmo, co-director of Outfitter Public Art Project, and this is Andrew McGill. He's one of our artists. Most recently, we did the Fire Station 2, the Plattsburgh, 90 Bridge Street, Michael Anderson, Richmond Star Hero. We've been speaking with Ethan about opportunities to involve the city with a wayfinding tour from the marina, leading people up to the arts corridor at the Betty Little Arts Park. And Andrew McGill has this great idea for Platts Curve, a new mini art project that will lead everyone from the arena to the arts park and maybe in other places around town to use art as wayfinding opportunity. So he came up with this design for Bassburg as our first wayfinding method, and this is an example of the design to show. These would be, they're about 10 inches by 5 inches. They'd be located on curves along the sidewalks. so people.
On the curb, on the curb.
Not on the sidewalk, on the curb, either front facing or top facing.
Yeah.
So that people could follow them. And it'd be totally funded independently by us, and our artists would be paid by us, that are non-materials.
So you're looking for the approval of just doing the work.
And hopefully doing more of these and coordinating with the city if we want to lead people to other locations.
I love what you're doing. The outside art is absolutely phenomenal. Every time I see something new coming up, I commend you, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much.
And we hope we can connect with the city to do more things. I know in the past we've asked you about doing the electrical boxes and maybe garbage cans or exciting stuff. So hopefully, we'll be able to do some other things, and if you have ideas as well, we're always. collaboration.
I'd be happy to ask chairperson of the MLB board, Mike Kelly, to entertain having that conversation during the next MLB meeting about painting the electrical boxes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good place to. I have one comment about the specific art here, and I agree with Elizabeth that everything you've done is so wonderful to look around our city and see. But it doesn't look like the fish is swallowing the H. And I think it's kind of symbolic because at one time Plattsburgh didn't have an H at the end.
Yeah.
So that's pretty
That was
interesting.
actually the last piece of the puzzle of trying to incorporate that letter, so. It's still keep the overall design of the fast.
Well, it's really cool. Thank you for
So
doing
Annie's
that.
got it like cheap, right? A little bit.
A little bit.
So some other ideas we have, the migrations mural, we have the birds from different cultures and representing different people from the international students at SUNY Plattsburgh to the international population here. So we're thinking maybe some birds could fly around town, also maybe some flowers could escape from the community garden mural, maybe there are other opportunities. And we could lead to the farmer's market with the flowers or other places around that. So we are open to ideas and we're always here and excited to program more art.
You can look at it as wayfinding as well. You really could.
Yeah, and we hope, maybe we can put this on the city website. We have a new mural map that we're listing all as well. Our mural map is really popular. So, any questions?
Any questions for Amy and her team? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Mayor, just one quick comment on the parking kiosk thing.
Yeah.
Apologies to council, we had planned on a representative from IPS. It's our chosen parking kiosk manufacturer to be here today. He had a personal matter come up at the last moment, but he has rescheduled and he will be here with a demo unit of the kiosk that we are considering purchasing on the Tuesday, September 7th, infrastructure subcommittee meeting. So if any of the council would like to attend to watch that. certainly.
When is this again? I'm sorry.
That meeting's actually on a Tuesday, it's September 7th, it's next infrastructure subcommittee.
Okay, 4.1, discussion of the 2021 budget cycle and process. As I've reached out to a number of you, reached out to Richard Marks and all of our department heads. I have the initial budgets proposals from each department head coming in. As discussed with a number of counselors here, the structure that I'm recommending, that I'm proposing is me, one of you, and a department head sit down to review their budget. That budget will include whatever justifications they have for proposed 2022 work, including their payroll and any other capital expenses for that department, appropriate to that department. From those conversations, we work together with the department heads, me, you, and the department head will work together on, coming with a reasonable budget. And then subsequent to that, we'll have a number of budget hearings, public hearings with the department head, with the full council to review their budget in total. And it'll probably be over several days to do that, several departments to present. It may be that some of the larger departments will take the full scheduled 3 hours that we're scheduling for these meetings. But the whole idea is to put the budget process out in the public. To avoid some of the more contentious conversations that we have seen in the past. And to really support that kind of dialogue that we want to encourage with department heads when they start to propose their budgets with this council. After that, we're looking at the October 7th regular meeting for my office to present the total package with the budget message to the council and to the public. From that, it then gets passed on to the council for either approval or adjustments. The whole idea is that, everybody's going to be involved, so ideally we can make those adjustments beforehand, but if not, then, it's the right of the council to make adjustments post delivery from the mayor's office. Any questions about that, comments, suggestions for changes, or what else you'd like to see in that entire process leading up to the 7th of October? No? Okay. Feel free if you do have a suggestion or a comment or a change to that process. Always open to hearing that. 4.2, draft resolution approval of the creation of the City of Plattsburgh Housing Advisory Committee, motion by Councilor Canales, second by Councilor Gibbs. Discussion.
I think this is great.
Yeah. Look, we can keep pointing at, and we'll continue to point out the housing crisis in the area. We've had 2 major housing initiatives raise up in the town of Plattsburgh. The town of Plattsburgh, City of Plattsburgh, doesn't matter. Regionally, we're looking at adding a significant amount of housing to support, what last was measured at a 2% availability rate for housing in the region. Good quality housing means good quality jobs.
That's right.
And so if we're looking at the concern that we currently have for what housing we do have, this committee is going to help start to identify some of those constraints and those concerns. Part of this approach does include a SUNY Plattsburgh component specific to housing inventory in terms of what housing we do have, what is that housing used for, how many units, who owns it, who doesn't own it, kind of thing. And again, that then feed back into what availability housing and what housing does look like, the reality of what housing looks like in the city of Plattsburgh. Combine this, the recommendations that come out of here with the comprehensive master plan that we're doing and looking at any infill development opportunities, any properties that may be underutilized, private and public properties that may be underutilized that could then be potentially developed for housing, including the Reeves Lane parcel that we're looking at transitioning the boundary line here shortly. That, it's a whole package that we really do need to consider, not just in this year coming, but looking at the next 5-10 years of developing for housing that we just kind of trailed off with the last economic crisis. So any further discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 4.3, draft resolution authorizing contract for youth safety advocate with Plattsburgh City School Districts, motion by Councilor Canales, second by Councilor Gibbs. Discussion.
Yes.
Yes.
We have Lieutenant Trombley come up and discuss it, point out, how this differs from what's been done in the past. And I know Councilor Kelly and I spoke earlier today. I know he's got a number of questions regarding this, so.
Sure, I'd like to answer any questions.
And did you all receive the program outline?
Did, but
Okay.
again,
Understood.
our agenda came in late yesterday afternoon and there were tons of things. So I did read it.
Okay.
And could you summarize how is this different than what's been done in the past? So in years past, we've had the chief of police come here with the existing contract and, wait for approval from council. How is what you're proposing going to be different than what's been delivered in the past?
So as I picked this up,
and kind of delved into the project. It's really redefining, but it's more so firming up the elements that existed and just brought them to the forefront. So we've always been an advocate for the youth and student and body, administration, and parents, but we sometimes get overshadowed by the public safety or law enforcement cloud that we are very easily seen as. So this really is just a redefinition, a rework program so that the position is simply an advocate position. And we are there to be listeners, role models, and help guide and direct and facilitate resources to the youth and to the administration.
One of the things I noticed in the document is a very specific statement that this youth safety advocate will not be enforcing school rules. Like that is not going to be the rule. And to me, that's very important. It's different than what we've seen before come before the council. In the past, my concern has been liability to the city and oversight of the officers involved and the reporting component. So in other words, during a public safety committee meeting, we've never had a report back in the past of, what is this, in the past, we call it a school resource officer, we're calling it a safety advocate. What is this, what have they done, and so on. Is there going to be that kind of reporting requirement?
Yeah, it's specifically to the reimagining of this and the reinvention of this program. It was made crystal clear to Lieutenant in conversations with Superintendent LeBrun regarding the engagement and interaction of this safety advocate. Primarily that the safety advocate would just be in the background more than in the foreground in some cases. Any interaction with student, not talking about a hey, hello, how you doing, good to see you interaction, but more of a more hands-on engaged interaction based on the guideline of the program would be reported not only to the administration of the school, but also to Plattsburgh Police Department. That is the type of report that we've received in terms of that level of engagement. Any enforcement of school rules would need to be done by the school themselves, including any potential calls to the Plattsburgh Police Department. We're trying to really clearly delineate if the Plattsburgh Police Department needed to be phoned for any reason, which I would hope that, look, when I was in school, got into a couple fights, okay? Cops were never called, right? I don't know when that kind of culture shifted, but it's understandable. Like it's a different environment now. But in the case that the PD needs to be called outside of this role, they would be called separately. And maybe there might be some backup or some potential for support from this role after the police was engaged. But in the sense of reporting engagement, that's the level at which this redefined role would be engaging the students. Second from that, if the youth safety advocate does identify the need to engage with a student, that would be done through the administration, not directly by the advocate themselves, but in partnership with the administration. That advocate would go to the administration, say, hey, look, this kid, this, could use some help, here's some resources. Let's provide those resources based on what we have in our kind of book of business.
I know I'm going to go back to the discussion we had in this previously. I don't know why we're getting involved in this. Provides liability for the city with no real benefit. The school is more than capable of hiring whoever they need to do this sort of thing. I don't know why we would be involved. It's a school issue. I don't know. I just see it as a liability with no upside for the city.
We could certainly talk about the legal ramifications and what the school district is willing to take versus what the city is not willing to take. I think that it's been made clear to me through a number of conversations, the indemnification that the city wants to maintain if this person is hired, regardless of where they're from. But I can let Dean speak to that, and in conversations with the superintendent and the administration of the school, it's been pretty clear, like, hey, we're willing to take 100% of responsibility here. and, kind of partner with the city. In terms of, I'll tell you philosophically, in terms of why I think the city should certainly engage with this is we're talking about protecting the taxpayer. Philosophically, I see this as why not have the same taxpayer pay into what they're already paying into rather than in some type of outside agency or some type of outside municipality to provide the same service.
The school is perfectly capable of hiring their own people for that. They hire hundreds of people, so. I'm just saying, that's my opinion.
There's a possible potential to have this be the bridge built, rebuilt, so to speak, between the city and the school. You never know.
Yeah.
Last year, about this time, by unanimous decision, the council voted this down. And I'm wondering why it's coming back. And the biggest question I have is, how did the school district manage for a year without the school resource officer? What did you do to fill in that gap?
It was during COVID.
Couple answers, different council, different program.
I'm asking I believe these gentlemen work for
Sure.
the school district.
There's questions that I can answer why this is even coming back to the council. Okay, different council, different program. Okay, that's the whole reason why we brought it back. If it were the same SRO, same program, same language of the contract, I understand the temperature of the council, it would not have come back, right? We're talking about a reinvented program. And different board members on the other side too, right? So one of the reasons why I invited those folks is so that they can also talk to specifically why they wanted to bring this program back.
Well, that's my question. How did you manage without this program for the school year that transpired?
I don't want to step on protocol.
Are you recognizing him?
I'm
Chair?
fine with,
The
one of the
chair has
reasons
to
why
chair has to recognize them.
they can answer questions specific to their needs. It's they're requesting the contract as well. So their board members can come and speak to the needs that they're looking to address. Yeah, feel free.
You're welcome to come to the microphone if you like.
Can I just answer your question first?
Absolutely.
Transparency and oversight is key. The reporting and follow-up procedure is with the Plattsburgh Police Department and the advocates and the buildings or administration. Daily checks, weekly checks, and then monthly feedback for the public safety committee was the answer I would like to give.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because we didn't have that prior. And that was something that the mayor and I had spoken about extensively, which was a large contributing factor for me not voting for this last year. And we spoke extensively about what I would accept, what I did want to see.
Yeah.
And so that was the reason for my question. So thank you.
Welcome.
Appreciate the floor. I'm Jay LeBrun. I think I'm acquainted with most of you superintendent of schools. Couple direct questions. I'll answer those and then I'll hastily defer to the board members who are here as well. The global pandemic, I think, was mostly responsible for the limited need for resource officers or youth advocates, if you will, youth safety advocates. So to answer Councilor Kelly's question, the absence of advocates or resource officers basically coincided with the global pandemic, during which, as we all know, school was in session less than we all would have wanted. So rotating student attendance, periods of extended closure, just less students in the school during what happened to be the period of non-provision of resource officers, youth safety advocates. Councilor Moore raised a question of liability. I'm a champion of risk management, so I appreciate the question. It's really for you to answer, but I'll offer my thoughts on the matter that by that same line of thought, the city would not be interested in availing the school district of, say, South Acres Park and fields and other things wherein liability could also be created. So what we have in those instances are indemnification processes that I think we'd be interested in pursuing here as well. In turn, if we take that concern to the extreme, the district might also not be interested in inviting city functions such as the training of the police department and the like into our premises. So I think the relationship necessitates a certain degree of trust and appropriate indemnification. And those are my initial thoughts about that very valid point. Probably now it's best that I introduce a couple of colleagues from the Board of Education, President Amy Gerbich, Board Member Rod Sherman. They can certainly speak better to that or any other questions than can I. So again, We appreciate the moment and forum. You wish to speak further to that?
So something that I am really excited about, for those of you who don't know, I was just elected to the school board and now the current president for this year. Something that I'm really looking forward to is how we, the school board and the district, the city of Plattsburgh's school district can partner and work with the city of Plattsburgh. We are serving the same taxpayers. And I see our students as our future. And something that I really think can be beneficial with a youth safety advocate is to help bridge and to help break down barriers that people see with police officers and law enforcement, to have a more positive experience. As a former teacher, before my family moved here to Plattsburgh, I was a first grade teacher. I had a school resource officer in the building that I taught in. And one small way that I used him regularly is that I would have first graders come in with their hunting photos. These little kiddos on top of a deer, and they would, be proudly showing me what they had done that weekend with their dad or their granddad. And the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, these kiddos have guns in their houses or in homes that they spend time with. How do I know that my kiddos that I'm teaching, how do I know that they're safe? Because several years previously, my sister, who was also a teacher, had one of her students shoot himself in the head at Grandma and Grandpa's house. So I often would send my students to our school resource officer to do a gun safety check, because that is not my area of expertise. And that was one small way that I saw that person serve my students in a real way. Another way is that students in our school looked up to that individual and made connections. And I've heard from several families in our community say that they had positive experiences with the folks who were employed previously under a different title. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to share personally with you all. And I'm also willing to answer questions, but I'd like to let Mr. Sherman also speak.
Thank you. I was a teacher for 45 years in this district. Today it was nice to be here and see a lot of former VHS students sitting right here at this table. Nice to see you. I can't overemphasize the things you said, Mr. LeBron said, and our board president said about the fact that we serve the same taxpayers, whether you're sitting on the Common Council or you're sitting on the school board. It's the same taxpayers that are paying the money. I want to bring up one thing, though, that the other two did not bring up. We have to, as a school district, do something with either a school resource officer. We have to do something in terms of safety. And what other districts do in the area is they either go to the state police or they go to the sheriff's department. The cost at those two places, I can't compare. I don't know if it's more or less. But I listened a couple of years ago to you and other counselors who had some concern about the school resource officer. Doing it with you, hiring through our city police department, gives you a voice too as to what that position will look like. You have some control over that. If we went with the sheriff's department or the state police, you would have no say. And we want you to have a say. And I think that's where we're asking. We haven't, as a school board, reviewed this. I have some liability issues too. I wonder about FERPA. How much, that's the Family Educational Records Privacy Act. How much information can be shared? But, like you, just seeing this tonight, you're going over it. as a school board, we will go over it, ask probably many of the same questions of our superintendent, get the research. I want to thank the mayor and Lieutenant Trombley for your efforts to put this together, to share with you and to share with us, and hopefully as a community of Plattsburgh, we'll figure this out. Thank you.
We didn't have much time to prepare for this tonight, but I tried. I tried very hard to prepare for this tonight. And I went back over some of the material that we read or researched from the last time this came before the council. And I found one article in particular that I remember quite well, and it's neither from a left-leaning nor a right-leaning journal. It's from the USA Today, which is about as middle of the road as you can get. And there was an article in there a year ago, just over a year ago, from James Allen Fox. He's a Lippman Family Professor of Criminology Law and Public Policy at Northeastern University. And he's a member of the USA Today Board of Contributors. It's also authored by Aviva Rich Shea, who's chair of the Criminal Justice Department at Massasoit Community College in Massachusetts. So I'm just going to read you some of the salient points here. Their opinion is school's been closed for months because of the COVID-19 pandemic. When they reopen in the fall, let's leave the police, specifically school resource officers, out of the picture. Portland, Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler has already announced his plan to drop the assignment of our SROs, whose numbers and presence mushroomed in the 1990s as part of the Federal Community-Oriented Policing Services, or COPS initiative. And Mayor Rosenquist, that answers your question about how did the presence of COPS, suddenly mushroom in our schools. And there's your answer. It was a program in the 90s called the Federal Community-Oriented Policing Services. More important, Wheeler's approach, that's Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland, Oregon. Wheeler's approach makes sense, assuming that SROs are replaced with social workers and guidance counselors who are better able to deal with a wide variety of issues that arise in schools. Plus, these professionals come at a lower price. Schools are safe without police. Schools are safer in fact than they've been for decades, and not because of the presence of an armed police officer in all of it. Rather, school provides structure and supervision that many kids lack during their out of school hours. Although SROs may give parents some sense of comfort that their children are protected while at school, students actually face certain perils because of constant police presence. The well-traveled school to prison pipeline has been documented by research in terms of greater reliance on the justice system in response to student infractions, especially for minority youngsters. That minority youngsters brings me to mind that this weekend we were recognized for our diversity. And if we do anything that harms minority children, then I think that's not good. And I do recall talking with some of the parents of school children, minority parents, who told me that the school resource officers tend to pick on their kids more than the average ordinary white child. And, you can believe that or not believe it, but that was the information that was given to me by the parents of students in the Plattsburgh City School District. So prison or school prison pipeline, we want to cut that off for sure. And anything that endangers minority children, we want that to go away also. So,
If I may.
no, I'm going to finish, Gene, and then certainly, okay? I'm almost done. The placement of tens of thousands of police officers in public schools has resulted in the prosecution of normal childhood behavior. Being arrested for disturbing assembly and fighting at school has supplanted the opportunity for using these incidents as teachable moments of positive socialization. The criminalization of student misconduct should give way to informal alternatives such as in-school detention for minor transgressions and restorative justice for interpersonal conflict resolution. More generally, SROs limit students from developing a strong relationship with the school staff by acting as a disciplinary buffer zone. Learning appropriate interpersonal behavior and respect for rules is an important aspect of the child's education, especially for those who do not learn critical social skills at home, not an opportunity to be targeted and tagged by police. Now, if you care to do some research between now and the time that we vote on this, you will have a very difficult time finding articles that justify SROs in schools, the police in schools. It's becoming a thing of the past. And thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for that. I trust that the Plattsburgh City School District can find a suitable alternative to having police officers in schools. And they don't need our help, as Councilor Moore said, to make that decision. The city is not in the business of hiring and training people for school districts. That's just not what we should be doing. So I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Councilor Canales.
Yes. First, Lieutenant Tremblay, thank you for coming through. Superintendent, thank you for coming. Board members, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I want to address a few different things. First, I apologize for the villainization of our police force and of the school district.
Who villainized the police force? I did not. I read.
Sir, please let Councilor Canales finish.
We'll let him finish, but I did not villainize the police
Let-
force.
please
I
let-
take exception to that. And
Councilor Kelly, please.
I think it's beneficial for the public to see what kind of counselor Counselor Kelly is. Now, I can speak on behalf of minorities.
This is
Councilor Kelly,
unfair.
please.
You don't come and bring accusations against a counselor. You do not do that in these
Please
chambers.
yield yield the floor, to
Okay.
Councilor Canales.
So I speak on behalf of just myself, being a minority, an Afro-Latino that happens to be a counselor and a business owner in this city. What I can tell you is that the school resource officer, Officer Wolf, exceptional. The 4 years we've lived here, my daughters have been called nigger, spick, told that they're gonna be killed. The list goes on and on and on in this school district. So excuse me for any emotion that I may or may not present as I continue on in this conversation. But if anybody can talk to what minority children in this city go through, I believe that I'm an exceptional person to do so. So on that premise, I will speak loud and clear. This program is needed. It doesn't matter if it's in Plattsburgh, and I can unbiasedly state this. I am from a region in the United States where cartel runs rampant. Raised around it. Border town, Sierra Vista, Arizona. In my school, we had another officer, Officer Wolf, go figure. We had an Officer Wolf, Chad Wolf. He himself single-handedly thwarted at least 6, in my time in high school, 6 school shootings. So I see the benefit of having police force or advocacy of the sort in school districts. Pertaining to the USA Today article, it's talking to grand scale, large cities. We are rural America. With that being said, the minorities, I believe it's 87% of Plattsburgh population is Caucasian. And I don't know the exact amount of everything else, but I can tell you for the Hispanic, Latinx, Afro-Latino, I believe we attribute to maybe 3% to 2.5% of the total populace here in Plattsburgh. With that being said, I personally know just about every single minority there is, because when we see each other, we're like, hey, what's going on? Good to see you. So we're not alone. We have been racially profiled. Our children do go through different things. One of the biggest things that our children go through is propaganda. And so the community, or this youth safety advocate, as it's being called now, is a huge step in the right direction. And I appreciate you all's extending an olive branch where it seems that personal interest and personal emotion has gotten in the way of putting in our schools what's necessary. I yield the floor. Thank you.
To talk about, and this is something that Lieutenant Trombley and I made explicitly clear in terms of the concerns about when does this person engage in terms of discipline and criminal behavior. The whole program is geared towards this person not being involved in school discipline, not being involved in arrests, even criminal. That needs to be managed through another avenue. That erodes the trust of this person being there. It erodes the program and how the program is defined. Understandably, yes, if there is an emergency that is going to cause harm, that person has to step in as per their job function. But in terms of making arrests, enforcing school rules, that's not that person's job, right? There's a reason for that. That's why this is not a school resource officer.
Oh, can I?
That's why it's a youth safety advocate. It's a completely different program. And hearing those concerns and understanding those concerns, that's why we have changed the program ultimately.
May I
Please,
say something?
please.
So that, in our conversation, that was what was important to me in order for me to support this. And I don't have the document in front of me, so I can't, I'll have to rely on memory. Is there a component of the document that addresses like, or perhaps it'll be a school board issue. I'm not really sure how this will come out. If there are any kind of student complaints, or conversely, if there are positive things that students say about the youth advocate, will there be a component of gathering that information so that you are currently the senior officer in the police department, so you'll be overseeing this until such time as there is another. Will there be that kind of component of accountability and reporting, both good and bad, the equal component, that you will gather and then convey back to us, or void names, of course, void names of mechanism? That's what I'm asking, so that we can all have that information right now. Is there going to be a feedback mechanism for accountability to make sure that these individuals are used exactly the way that you have outlined, and we avoid these concerns of the youth advocate being used inappropriately?
Valid point. So we have follow-up meetings that we will continue to do and hone in these reporting and follow-up procedures. It's a valid point that you have, and part of transparency and oversight is key to have that feedback as well. So negative or positive, I invite it all, because I think the stronger we can present this as an advocate, because truthfully, that is what it is. They are not police officers in the schools. Story after story, when you put it's commonly referred to as an officer, but it's not, these positions are not police officers. They don't hold police officer title. They do deter a police officer from inevitably responding to an incident much smaller in nature, because they facilitate and they advocate and allow resources to be provided to the youth and staff. They are not police officers. They're not.
They are not sworn police officers. Is that what you're telling us? They don't wear a badge. They don't wear a uniform. Is that correct? They are not sworn police officers.
They are not sworn police officers.
They don't have the ability to arrest a child.
Well, they have peace officer status. You have power to arrest as a civilian, depending on the crime, as do they. So in an emergent situation, they are to act. An emergent situation for the mental and physical safety of the building, the campus, the student, and the staff. But they are not police officers.
So for example, if there is a exceptionally dangerous incident that you're witnessing or the officer is witnessing, is it the duty to respond?
Yes, I believe it's everyone's duty to respond.
Yes. So if there is an argument between children in a hallway, the officer isn't going to go over and intervene. That would be an incident, just so we're clear about how this will be used, because I think that's our concern here. That would be an indication, that would be,
That's not my concern at all.
Well,
My-
that-
My concern is back to
Liability.
I had a year ago, which is I have no problem with the school hiring somebody like that. They can go ahead and do that. They do not need us to do that. I think by us getting involved in it, it creates liability that we do not need to have. They can have that person, they just don't need to go through us to do it.
that's true, but if they go to another agency, they're not gonna have this. And we, and this is the reason why
Another agency, they can hire the same person that you would. provide.
no, they can't.
It's
No, they can't. They
The
have
same
their
type of
restrictions.
person.
the
Maybe
me-
not the
the
same.
mechanism for them hiring the same person that has the same function. They cannot do that. So they cannot hire somebody who can. You can explain it. Could they hire? Could they hire a security person? Yes. Can they hire a security person that carries a firearm? No, they cannot. They have to
We wouldn't
hire.
want a person with a firearm in school.
They have to
It's not
hire.
danger to anything.
Well, we even went back and forth with this program to say, does this person or should this person carry a firearm?
Absolutely not.
Well, I was on the mindset and I said, why? If we're talking about a safety advocate, we don't have to have that person, right, carry a firearm. However, students, parents, the school board, the police department said, what if something happens? What if we have another school shooting? What if it happens here? Do we want to have a youth safety advocate running around, not being able to respond immediately with in-kind force?
No, it's the Wild West.
Well, sure, but
No, we shouldn't bring guns into school. Everybody should be unarmed in the school.
well, sure, but tell the person that's locked and loaded running up into a school because they have a mental health issue. The thing is, do we have to concern ourselves with the most extreme example? Sometimes in this case we do, right?
Well,
Trying to keep the
sometimes we
emotion,
don't.
I try to keep the emotion out of these arguments and look at the evidence. And there is no evidence to indicate that school resource officers or whatever you choose to call them have any impact on school shootings. In fact, they can sometimes make them worse. And if you care to read about that, please do. And you will discover that that is not an argument to have police in schools. They have no impact on school shootings. A person who decides to shoot up a school walks in the front door. Well, where's the officer at that point? He may be at the far end of the building. In the case of the Plattsburgh City School District, he may be in another building. In fact, the police may be able to respond from police headquarters to a school shooting faster than a school resource officer could do so. And that's what the evidence suggests. Our city police department, now, Councilor Canales, I want you to understand, I do not villainize the police department.
And no one said you
I
did.
trust them very much. And they respond within seconds sometimes of calls. Called before and they're at a fight scene within a minute. They were come to my neighborhoods for specific issues going on within seconds. So the statement that having an officer in the schools is somehow a deterrent to violence is not true. It's simply not true. So we need to think about that. We need to think about the liabilities for the city. We need to think about the school to prison pipeline and let the school district find some other way to do this. They can probably find a more productive way to do this than we can.
May I make
One more.
one
we're
final
gonna
statement?
call-
I
One
know
more,
we do
we're
have
gonna
to
call the
go.
question.
That's very true. The school district can do any number of those things. They make their own policies. We don't make their policies for them. So they're going to do this with us or without us. And I would rather do it with us in the room where we can control the accountability and the reporting. If they decide that they're going to go to the sheriff's department or the state troopers, we have no control over it, no reporting, no accountability, and no involvement. So I would much rather have this kind of relationship than the school district go elsewhere. They're still going to do what their policies dictate, but we don't have any control over it. And that's why, and I fully appreciate everybody's perspectives. Let me finish, please don't interrupt me. So I fully appreciate everybody's perspectives. I just want everybody to understand where I'm coming from. But also, we also need to understand the vote tonight is only to move this to next week's agenda. This is not a decision. This is only a discussion to decide whether or not it goes before the entire council next week for the final discussion. And I really want to thank you for everything you did and answering questions tonight and for school board members showing up as well.
All right, call the question. Roll call vote, Counselor Canales.
Yes.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Gibbs.
Yes.
Counselor Talon.
Yes.
Counselor Bob is in the absent. She cannot vote. Unfortunately, she cannot vote. Counselor Moore.
No.
3 to 3, Rosenquist in the positive. So 4 to 3, count action passes. Carried. What? Yeah. I will now take a motion to go into executive session. Counselor Canales, second by Counselor Gibbs. All in favor?
And
Better discuss, pending litigation about.
and we will come back and
We will come back.
do no further action. So for any members of the audience who are wondering. Well, thank you.
We'll be in the old council chamber.
Okay. Somebody pizza or?
Session here. Counselor, yes.
Just
It's salty here.
Sorry.
Instead of getting salty now, we're gonna have to sit down.
Folks, hey, can we call this board to order, please? Counselor Kelly, will you mind joining us for the last motion here? I'll take a motion to come out of executive session. Counselor Canales, Counselor Gibbs, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I apologize. Look, I understand the conversation is contentious. I understand that there's two sides to it. I appreciate that. I do apologize for the emotion that comes with that. I do. But we do have to come together as a team, right? And even when we disagree, we've got to figure out a way to disagree respectfully and appropriately. So with that being said, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Counselor Moore, second by Counselor Gibbs. All in favor?
Aye.